To a blip in the space-time continuum and clever use of archive footage. We are joined today by creator of Star Trek, Mr. Gene Roddenberry himself. Now these wormholes are tough to maintain, so let's just get right into it. Gene, let's put things in context here. What kind of writing were you doing before Star Trek?
I was a freelance writer who got tired of writing scripts about nothing at all, and I began reading science fiction. And among the science fiction I read was the Swift's about the Lilliputians, and I began to see from that you could write about something in science fiction. And so I dreamed up the Star Trek idea so that I could comment on man and society.
Hey, and about that first pilot, what was NBC's reaction to it overall?
They didn't want to have anything to do with it. They thought that I made it too complicated. They felt I had offered them a wagon train to the stars, which I had, because I wanted to sell it. And Westerns were very big at the time. And I felt that I'd double-crossed him. I'd written him this thing about where the mind went in certain ways, and they wanted someone with bare knuckles in a fist fight.
Okay, it's kind of well known what they didn't like about it. What did they like about that pilot?
They turned it down, but they did like some parts of it. The first time they said they'd ever felt like they were truly in a spaceship. And they turned it down. They said, now, if you will really give us the equivalent of a Western, we can put you back to work on it. So we made him a second show, which had a lot of science fiction elements, too, but at least it ended up with Bill Shatner in a bare-knuckle fist fight in which he beats a godlike figure in a fair brawl. And I thought it was a terrible idea, but it worked and it met their needs, and that started us. We sold Star Trek with it.
Okay, now Jeffrey Hunter, fairly acclaimed actor at the time. He wasn't in the second pilot. Why wasn't he?
Jeffrey was a good actor, and it was good to have him on the show. However, his wife kind of felt that science fiction was a little beneath him, and so they didn't want to go on to a second pilot. Bill Shatner then came available. Thank God, because Bill did a marvelous job, as we know from 20 years of reruns. And with it behind him, we put the series together.
Okay, the old tagline of Star Trek has been "Wagon Train to the Stars," and a lot of people don't forget that it's a reference to the old Western series Wagon Train, where they go around with a regular group of characters, but encounter things along the way. Now, was Star Trek originally intended as a wagon train, or was that just a way to sell the show?
It was both. It was sort of a little fakery on my part, too, because Westerns were exciting then, and they could understand wagon train, whereas very few people in those days read science fiction, and almost no network executives or studio heads. And, they thought in terms of Buck Rogers and of naked girls in silver breastplates, and nothing about what the heart of real science fiction is, stories about people and ideas. And so I had to fake a little bit to get them to watch it.
Now, we know censorship was a big thing, was very big back in the 60s. How did you deal with the network censors to get these stories out?
Well, I had enough up and downs, so when I came back to Paramount and we started talking about a second run of Star Trek, which became The Next Generation, I said I wasn't interested. I just, in all of those years of doing 78 Star Trek episodes, the emotional cost was too much. I was being censored because they claimed we had open mouth kisses, and they were measuring. We had a whole show thrown off the air because a lady's navel was seen in it. And although the next year, the networks came out with Laugh-In, and belly buttons were wild then. It's a ridiculous way for a writer to lead his life, to have junior executives who don't know writing and don't know science fiction telling you cannot do this or you must do this.
Okay, now we all know the names. Dorothy Fontana, script editor, figure what that is. She had the script. Bob Justman, was the money guy. Gene Coon. What was Gene Roddenberry's role? And what was your overall job with Star Trek?
I'm an artist. basically, that's what artists have done since time immemorial. That's why you've always had artists, even with cavemen and so on. It is a basic and necessary function for humanities. Artists explain everything that we see and explain why it's important. And art is not a thing of deft, beautiful writings or sculpturing of music. It's a thing of comment.
Now, one of the things about Star Trek is the casting was oftentimes, rather incredible. Like, you had Bill Campbell, normally known for, like, tough guy, gangster stuff, and he's playing a part seeming to be written from Liberace. Now, how was the casting approach for Star Trek?
I had always been a fan, speaking of Westerns, of Gunsmoke, and with their cast of Kitty and Doc and Chester and so on. And I noticed how well that worked over episode after episode. And I thought, if I ever do a series, I want to do the same type of thing where the characters are like Uncle Joe drops by, and there's Dad, and there's Brave Brother, and so on. And so I really cast my Star Trek people as a television family. And you knew what their secrets were, and you would laugh at the same joke every week, as you do in real life. Briefly,
what was the idea behind Captain Kirk?
Captain Kirk is Captain Hornblower of the sailing ships, who was a great hero, and Hemingway said is the most exciting adventure fiction in the human language.
Okay, and how about Spock? What was the inspiration for him?
Myself. I had screwed up so many times in life through emotions. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to write someone who is totally emotionless and logical?
All right, one thing was, was the character of Chekhov. Pretty much Star Trek went where where a Man from U.N.C.L.E. gone before that, and a Russian character in the height of the Cold War. What was the thought process behind that?
Chekhov came on the show because I'd read something, and someone had sent me a copy of a Russian newspaper in which they said after our first year, the ugly Americans are at it again. We were the first people in space, but the Americans don't even have a Russian aboard this crew. So I wrote the Russian aboard the crew and sent a copy of it to the Communist Youth newspaper, which they never answered.
These was had very strong feelings about what kind of character Uhura should be. Now, what went behind that?
When I was trying to find a name for Nichelle Nichols, and thought of the Swahili for freedom, which is Uhuru, and decided to feminize it, make it Uhura, I knew I could hear her shriek of joy from across town. I was pleased that in those days, when you couldn't get even blacks on television, that I not only had a black, but a black woman and a black officer. And that'll show them.
And how did the character of Sulu come about? He first started with a physicist and then, moved over to Helm. What did that go?
Great affection I have for Asians and what they do and the important part they play in the world. And I just could not have a group of Earth people without including that great, one half or more of the Earth continents.
Okay, why might you settle on making the chief engineer a Scotsman?
Scots have always been shipbuilders and ship engineers and so on, and that was a bow to true tradition and a great fun bow too.
Okay, much has been said about canon and the whole. Why do you think the whole lore of Star Trek is so popular?
Because it speaks to some basic human needs that there is a tomorrow. It's not all going to be over with a big flash and a bomb. That the human race is improving, that we have things to be proud of as humans. No, ancient astronauts did not build the pyramids. Human beings built them because they're clever and they work hard. And Star Trek is about those things.
Why? Well, the big thing these days is, like the old cliche, what I always wanted to do was direct, and the producers just jump behind the camera and direct it themselves, like certain others won't talk about now. Why do you never direct an episode or any of the movies?
I feel that my principal love is writing words, language. Probably if I had started directing early, I would have enjoyed it very much, because certainly the director, particularly in motion pictures, is the man in charge of a production, which is sort of the reason I decided to, after producing the first Star Trek movie, I decided to go back to television, because in television, the writer-producer is the man. And I was more interested in getting my ideas over than I was in making a movie that looked good.
Okay, one of the things that Star Trek has always prided itself is the scientific accuracy, or at least plausibility of the storyline. How would you describe with your relationship with the scientific community?
Well, I'm very close to the people at NASA and places like that, as at MIT and so on. And I learn a lot from them, and they call me with ideas. As a matter of fact, one of the advanced planners of NASA is arriving in town today, and I'll be having some meetings with him next week. They've been very helpful. I was very afraid when I started Star Trek that scientists and NASA people would say, "Oh God, you're so inaccurate and you're so wrong," and I almost hated to deal with them at first, until I discovered that they're not like that. They're intelligent, and because they're intelligent, they understand the problems of show business, and they understand that I had to appeal to a mass audience as well as a specialized audience, and it's been a love feast. Someone asked me some years ago, before I'd ever gotten any kind of a check for Star Trek reruns, what is your profit on the series? And I said, the greatest profit of all, the people that I could not pay to meet and know, Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and the NASA people and the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab where I'm welcome. Wow, you can't buy that.
Okay, who are Star Trek fans in your eyes? Who are these people and what are they like?
Far too many people believed, and many still believe, that they're a bunch of teenagers who wear odd clothing and give odd signs and things, but they're not. Trekkers include businessmen, bank presidents, stockbrokers, college professors, and a large number of astronauts, of whom I saw a couple 2 nights ago who were out here. Trekkers are really... It also includes the kids, and God bless them and let them have fun. But it's people who sort of believe in the general type of thing we're talking about in Star Trek, that the human species is to be admired, and it is really going to go somewhere.
Okay, when Star Trek: The Motion Picture was being considered, what was your reasoning behind the whole thing? We know the studios, they wanted to make money, but how about you?
Well, the fans were wild for the idea, and I kind of liked the idea too. I was broke. The people were not exactly standing in line to hire the guy. I was a much sought-after freelance writer until I did Star Trek. Then the story got around town that I had done this crazy series that practically broke the studio from its costs and all that sort of thing, and I couldn't get much work. I figured from the movie, maybe I could get involved to the point of making some money, which my wife and I desperately needed to pay our mortgage and so on. And so I guess I was encouraged by greed as much as by a chance to see what Star Trek could do on the big screen and with an adequate budget and so on. And I'm glad we went along that way.
Since the movies kind of went on without you for the most part, it's like, how would you feel about that?
And when I didn't want to produce them, Harv Bennett came along, and he did a very good job. He was a very experienced producer, and I was delighted to leave that in his hands, with myself keeping the consulting function.
Okay, what benefits do you see, coming from Star Trek?
First Star Trek series, we treated such things as mixed races aboard the spaceship, and whether women could be in charge of anything and so on. And when we shocked the audience by saying yes to those questions. In the new series, with new characters and new attitudes, we have a chance to deal with still more important questions, and questions of the 80s and the 90s, such as the question of terrorists. The question last year we touched on the question of drugs. Why do people take drugs? Because they're bad? Obviously, there's more to it than that. I want to touch on the problems of superstitions which rule the world and set people bombing each other.
And how do you feel about the fans? Because it's got to be daunting, all these guys fawning at your feet.
I respect them. There are all sorts of trekkers, from teenagers to businessmen to professionals, and they're people who want this. Largely, they want the same sort of things out of humanity that I want. And it's strange to go to a meeting of people who are some of whom are wearing strange clothes and making strange signs and so on, and find out that they're very serious and they care deeply about who and what this creature human is.
And what influence, if any, have Star Trek fans had on the survival of the show? Of how to keep them alive?
Well, they kept it alive through their clubs and their various meetings and so on, and for which, but they kept it alive because they enjoyed doing these things. They enjoy their conventions just as much as veterans enjoy their conventions. I've never let trekkers, though, run Star Trek, because Star Trek is an artistic endeavor that is best run by the professionals. And I will listen to trekkers and trekkies. I will listen to the guard at the gate and get many good ideas those ways. But no, I will never make a change in Star Trek because I think it will please the trekkers. In that way lies prostitution. And you cannot be a good producer, writer, or anything if you first thing you ask is, what do they want? That's what prostitutes do. I write what I think they should have and what I think they'll enjoy. And thank God I've been right occasionally.
What definitive message does Star Trek have, all forms, for all the viewers? What's it all boil down to?
Because it says it's not all over. It's not all, we're not going to go up in smoke. We're going to make it. Because it says the human adventure has just begun. That's it in a nutshell.
How do you think will happen to Star Trek after Gene Roddenberry's no longer there to say yay or nay?
I would hope there are bright young people growing up all the time who will bring to it levels and areas that were beyond me. And I don't feel jealous about that at all. I think that, as I was saying, Hollywood, the motion picture industry is a remarkable thing, and it'll go on without any of us, and get better and better and better, because that really is the human condition, is to improve and improve.
As we're talking to you right now, you're in the middle of early days, starting Next Generation. It's going great. What were your thought process when Paramount said we want to do a new Star Trek show?
Get lost, to go through the things I went through with network executives and so on, to do it all over again. On the first show, on the original Star Trek, I practically lost my family from working so many 12-hour days, 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And I said, you can't pay me enough to do that. But then they said, hey, but suppose we did it in a way in which they call syndication, in which we don't have a network, and we don't have all those people. And Paramount was saying to me, and we guarantee to you that you will be in charge of the show. I asked, who would be the censor? They said, you. You've been around television long enough to know what doesn't play and what can't. And very slowly I began to be, and then it occurred to me that we couldn't possibly do it with the old cast. The old cast was doing movies. You couldn't afford them in the first place. Nor could you do it with the old cast because the crew people you have who need encouragement, who need to have their thing. People don't just work for money. The mixers, the cameramen, and all of those people have to have their show. And with a new cast, it could be that way. It could have new ideas and so on. The whole group could say, as they say today, it's our Star Trek. And you desperately need that.
And what do you think about the future of Star Trek beyond this point?
After doing all of those episodes, are there new things you can do? My God, yes. The basis of our series is the galaxy, and there's quite a few stories out there.
Are there kind of moral imperatives you put on the characters, about the behavior, how they would act in the show, what they wouldn't do?
I decided that we can't have people smoking. Although I smoked in those days, the networks advertised cigarettes. I said, man, we'll just be too smart to keep this up. So I said, no one smokes, which caused lots of problems. I feel the same thing about drinking today, and I hasten to say I drink and enjoy it. We're too smart to continue that for long, and we have invented for the barroom something called synthanol, which acts just the same as alcohol, makes you feel that you can be a lover or wise or all the things that alcohol does, but it's only temporary. You with the force of will, you can shove it aside and you're as sober as you ever were. So our ship will have synthanol.
Okay, after all the struggles and the divorces and bankruptcies and lost friendships and fights and everything, are you comfortable now with how Star Trek has turned out and your success?
No, it makes me nervous because it isn't good enough what we did, and we've got to now build on that and make it better. Once you begin sticking your tongue out, literally or figuratively, at people, your brain goes too, and you end up with a show that is crap. And I want Star Trek to do the things it can do. I've never felt that I had it made.
Are there any ideas you're still looking to explore in Star Trek? You haven't gone there yet.
What we can expect in the future is to continue to explore the human creature and what our problems is, and the things I talked about, the place superstition is playing in destroying harmony between nations and so on. Also, I'd like to get a little bit into the absurdities of 20th century politics, which we can look back on from the 24th century. And we'll consider the 20th century something that we had to go through, but our people will see it as something they're glad to be rid of,
Okay, now Paramount worked with you quite a bit with developing the new Star Trek show. How's that process gone?
Paramount said, we will back you in this, and by God, they did. And I've had nothing but good treatment out of them. I do feel sometimes they were nervous about giving the keys to the asylum to a writer, but despite their nervousness, they stood true to their word, and I really respect them and thank them.
All right, we've gone a great deal of detail over the years of how Star Trek has influenced the world, what's changed because of Star Trek. How has Star Trek influenced you? What effect has it had on you?
There's a guy who knows something about what Star Trek should be, but doesn't know it all, and I see Star Trek as part of the continuing education of Gene Roddenberry. I learn new things every day about science and humanity and history. They're paying me to go to college and paying me very richly, and I thank them.
Okay. Thank you, Gene. We appreciate it. We'll let you get back to your spot in the timeline, get back to work, because you got a lot of stuff to do, I can tell you right now. Won't tell you what, spoilers. So, everybody out, PayPal, Patreon down below. Godspeed to those going to Vegas. I wish I was going with you. At least the riding crop I provided is going there, but hey, I take what I can get. And we will talk at you later.